Today is February the 14th, 2012. My name is Roger Soyset. I'm here with Tony Hilliard at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia, where we are volunteers. With us is Mr. Skip Davis, a veteran of the Vietnam War, who has agreed to share his experiences with us during his tour of duty in the U.S. Army. This interview is being recorded for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project through the efforts of the Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association. Mr. Davis, would you please give us your full name and address?
My full name is Sumner James Davis, and I currently reside at 89 West Nuthatch Drive in Monticello, Georgia.
Would you please give us your date of birth and a little bit about your life growing up?
I was born on July 31st, 1945. World War II was still going on. My father was an infantry officer veteran of Southwest Pacific with jumps in New Guinea and New Britain. And he had already had 2 children, was in his early 30s, and had to fight to get in the Army. Went to NCO school, went to Officer Candidate school, went to Australia. And while he was returned from the Southwest Pacific as not fit for overseas duty, he was on the docks in Oakland, figuratively, actually at the military base out there, getting ready for the invasion of Japan. So 6 days after I was born, they dropped the bomb, and my father thankfully did not have to go back to the Pacific. My uncle spent 2 years in the Luftwaffe POW camp after being shot down over in Norway, and he was repatriated in the spring of 1945. I raise that only because I'm named for him. He was Lieutenant J.G. Sumner Robinson Davis. I was born in Melrose, Massachusetts. I was the third of what would eventually be 5 sons to Walter Bethune Davis and Pauline Price Davis, and went to school in Gloucester on the coast of Cape Ann, and was raised on a beach actually, and later on went to high school, and then went to a prep school that my father, my uncle, and my 2 older brothers attended, and then on to the University of Massachusetts. I had a relatively nondescript sports history. I did go to UMass as a history and political science major, and literally had almost no idea of what Vietnam was, what was going on in Southeast Asia, what Laos was. Probably the closest understanding I had was something in a headline about the Tonkin Gulf, which I never fully understood or really paid much attention to. And then, unfortunately, in October of 1965, my father suddenly died after an extended illness and we thought recovery. I fell somewhat below academic levels at the University of Massachusetts, and then my mother was diagnosed with untreatable cancer. And in June of 1966, Lyndon Johnson sent me a beautiful missive that said, "Greetings, your friends and neighbors have selected you to represent them in the United States Army." I reported for pre-induction, I believe it was the 19th of June, 66, was found suitable for acceptance into the armed forces. So I immediately ran to a recruiter to find out what my other options might be. And fortunately or unfortunately, I was able to enlist as a military police officer candidate. In August of, I guess that was in August of 66, I went into the military at South Boston Army Base on 10 November 1966. Went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. While there, was interviewed for OCS application, was accepted. I thought I was going to Fort Benning. Obviously the MP thing went by the boards. I was trained as an infantry 1-1 Bravo, and upon graduation found out I was going to Fort Balfour with the Corps of Engineers. and I embarked there on the 31st of March. Was accepted in the first week, went through 23 weeks, and on the 8th of September 1966 was commissioned as second lieutenant in the Corps of Engineers. Which, interestingly, pardon me, 1967, I'm losing my dates here, I apologize. It was September of 67 that I graduated from OCS. My father graduated on the 15th of September 1942 from the Fort Benning Infantry Officer OCS. So within 1 week, we were 25 years apart. I just found that out recently. So I went from there to Fort Bliss, Texas. I was assigned to an engineer battalion that had already had its overage and was on its way to Vietnam, so they released me to the Hot Missile Training Battery. And as an engineer officer, I became one of the few basic missilemen the Corps of Engineers ever had. I took the AIT course and was awarded the basic missileman status.
What is that's an acronym, HOT?
The Hawk missile is part of the old ADA. If
Oh,
you remember
Hawk,
back in the
Hawk,
60s and
okay.
70s, we
Yeah,
had the
yeah.
ADA. And we got in a lot of trouble because we had this computer about the size of this room that used to track our targets. And of course, we had no targets to track. The Air Force was long gone from Bliss. So occasionally we'd target a Braniff for Eastern Airlines, and they got very upset with us for doing that. I spent a brief period of time as the S1 in the Provisional Vulcan Chaparral Training Battalion, which was just standing up then, and realized I had to go to Vietnam, and probably the best way to do it was to pick my time and place. So in the old Army terms, I put in a 1049 and requested transfer to Vietnam. I got to Vietnam somewhere in the second week of May, I believe, of 1968. I was assigned down from Long Binh to Saigon to the Army Engineers in support of MACV. And in my case, I was assigned to the 4th Military Assistance Corps. We started in Vong Tau, and I was there about a week and a half, and they loaded us up on LSTs and moved us out into the South China Sea and down to a place called Can Tho on the Ba Sac River. That was to become my home for pretty much the next 18 months. We landed on the north side of Can Tho in a community called Bin Tui. There was a Navy base, and also adjacent to it was an Air Force base on an old Japanese fighter base. And found out that we resided in those days, a semi-luxurious French hotel in downtown Can Tho. We had the first 4 floors of the thing. And all of my effort was out on the Can Tho Army Airfield. I was kind of like a mini engineer construction battalion. I had 2 bulldozers, 2 road graders, a bucket loader, a crane, I think about 5 or 6 dump trucks, 5-ton engineered dump trucks. And we did anything that was necessary to support and provide for the living of the MACV advisory teams throughout all of 4 Corps. We might be building a bathroom and shower complex in this place, and a team house in this place, and installing an electrical distribution system in this place. I remember specifically a 100 kW generator going to Ba Sac. We built a team house on an island off of Rockjaw for the Navy Riverine forces that were using converted junks that had Cummins diesel engines in them, and they could attain 25 to 30 knots in these old junks with these diesel engines, and they chased the bad guys up and down the rivers. And I remember sending the Chinooks out there with our loads, because that's the only way you could get construction material out there, to build these team houses, which were nothing but 2x4 slats and screen and metal roofing on a concrete pad. Got out to Phu Quoc Island, which was the home of the manufacturer of Nook Mom. And there was a Navy CPO club out there that we used to spend a lot of time at, having some fun. Used to hitch rides on Air Force bird dogs back and forth from Phu Quoc Island. That's how I got from one place to another. We had a Chinook, lost power, 10 miles off the coast of Rockjaw, and they had to put it in the water. And of course, in Vietnam, they didn't have any plugs in them, so they filled up like a bathtub as soon as they hit the water. The only thing is it only settled about 6 or 7 feet into the ground because the silt was so thick. That's how deep the water was. And here's a Chinook sitting out there buried about 6 feet in the water into this mud. I spent about 6 months with the 210th Engineer Detachment, about 120 soldiers. I was a second lieutenant, as I said. I traveled around. My two main responsibilities was to go out and estimate jobs, what it would take to do this or that or build this team house, and also oversee the water and electrical distribution systems at the major places like Soc Trang, Vinh Long, Canto, Rockjaw. While we didn't necessarily run the sites, we were responsible for them. I was a contracting officer representative with the civilian company called Pacific Architects and Engineers, who did a lot of the light maintenance and construction as contractors. Our job was to make sure, one, that they did the job right, and two, that they cost it outright so we weren't cheating the government of any money. And it was a very interesting experience. I learned power distribution, I learned water purification. One experience I had that will always stick with me is I was asked by my then commander, Captain Avant, to go down to Soc Trang and find out what the water situation was. Because to our knowledge, we had nobody down there. But there were a lot of people assigned to the base, and they had water. I went into the purification plant about 10 o'clock in the morning, and here were two of the scraggliest looking young, to me, and I was only 22 probably at the time, kids, running around and pushing buttons and putting chemicals in and sitting down and making notations. And they had raggedy shorts on and torn up t-shirts, and I gathered them around like Papa San would and asked for an explanation. One was a specialist and the other was in the PFC, and they were responsible for the water. And obviously, being a very good second lieutenant, my ire was rising as I looked at them. And I mean, literally, they hadn't shaved, they hadn't had a haircut in probably 3 months. And I was about ready to pounce when, for some reason, I had enough insight to say, well, how long have you been here? Well, sir, I came in country 19 months ago. I looked at the other kid, he said, I was 3 or 4 months behind. He said, when did you extend? What do you mean extend, sir? I said, who do you answer to? No one, sir. And I said, why are you here? He said, well, we were brought down here and we were told to purify the water and keep it potable for the soldiers. And that's what we did. And we assumed that when they wanted us to stop doing that, they'd relieve us. And I said, well, what was your instruction? And he said, I think I remember the commander saying something like hold until relieve or something like that. These kids should have rotated back 6 and 8 months before that. They probably should have been promoted. They got their chemicals through negotiations with PA&E. They had no accounts. They couldn't order anything. They ate in the various mess halls that would feed them. They got haircuts whenever Papa San felt bad enough for them, or one of the PA&E contractors would buy them a haircut. They drank in the enlisted clubs, and I mean, that was their existence. And all they did was get up 7 days a week and purify water. One of them went home both of them went home as E5s with a hell of a lot of back pay, and both of them went home with Bronze Stars. And I'm happy to say both were gone from country within 8 days of my meeting with the thanks of a proud nation. I think that's probably the single biggest thing that sticks in my mind. That and Papa San the farmer, who I think we all had experience with it, in order to keep his wife and kids safe, he would go out 3 or 4 times a week with his little mortar tube and his little 10 rounds, And about 11 o'clock at night, he'd drop 10 rounds into that tube as fast as he could and walk them across the city. And you'd wake up and you hear boom, boom, boom. And you could almost reliably count out 10 rounds, and Pop's son's already on his way home. There's nowhere you go. And that was his duty, and I don't think anybody ever got hit. I don't think anything important ever got hit. But he went out and did his mandatory 10 rounds, and you could rely on it almost like clockwork. I was fortunate enough to be promoted to first lieutenant, and the only thing that really stands out with that is my mother had sent my father's second lieutenant bar to me. So in the promotion ceremony, I received my dad's silver bar to be first lieutenant. We got a new colonel in, things got bigger. I took command of the 508th Engineer Detachment, which was, and I may get these confused, but one was a water purification plant, the other was a firefighting plant. We had maybe 30 odd people assigned to both units. And I was responsible for the 508th, and then I got the 510th. We just shot short orders, and they had to have somebody in command, so they put me in command of those two units. And I was also simultaneously the construction officer of the 210th Engineer Dev. In the spring of 1969, I received preliminary orders to go to West Point in May of '69, and kind of like a summer camp cadre guy. It wasn't to be on the staff of West Point or anything, but I guess they do things like the 9-week ROTC stuff, and they needed troop pushers for that. Also during that period, if you remember, for a voluntarily indefinite extension of a minimum of 1 year, you could be promoted to captain. And I kind of weighed these things, and I didn't have any, other than my mother and younger brother at home, I didn't have anything really dragging me home. I really had pretty good duty, and I was kind of enjoying myself and felt like I was making a little bit of an effect. So I, instead of going to West Point, I asked to extend in Vietnam and put in my voluntary and def. And I came home in July of '69, pardon me, just in time to watch Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walk on the face of the moon. And again, humorous. All of the officers in the Army in those days had someone at the office or personnel office that kind of looked over their career and where they'd go and what their assignments would be. And mine was a guy named Major Sands. He was captain and then major. And I called him up and I said, what do I need to do to get an extension to my leave? Because you got a 30-day leave when you extended in Vietnam. And he said, well, you know, it's got to be pretty serious, hospitalization, death of a family or something. I do have the authority to give you a 7-day extension. I said, okay, I'll take that. Well, it turns out the new colonel had shown up, and his first lieutenant, soon to be Captain Davis, was supposed to be home on a Monday, and he never came home. Where is he? He's AWOL. Apparently Washington never bothered to tell Saigon that I got a 7-day extension. So I walked into Camp Doe, and I all but got arrested by the MPs. Surely, I had a couple of near misses. We worked under the 53rd Group from May until July of '68, and then somebody came up with this idea of inventing the United States Army Engineer Construction Agency Vietnam, which consolidated all these engineer elements that were supporting MACV through the 4 corps. And of course, when you put it on a bumper sticker, it looked like USACAV on your bumper sticker. So everybody thought you were CAV, you know. And closest I came was clearing a 45 in the Oli room one day and driving the bolt forward thinking it was clear, and boom, put a hole through the room and scared the bejesus out of about 4 people in the orderly room, including my first sergeant, who was not amused. We had one kid shoot himself in the foot to get home. He wasn't a bad kid, and he did a halfway decent job, but he just, for whatever reason emotionally, he just couldn't take it anymore, and it was bad enough that he was willing to shoot himself in the foot with an M16 round to get out of Vietnam. I think about him quite often. We also had a task, unusual, B team up in Kai Kai, right up in, kind of in the Dog's Face, Seven Angels, Virgin Mountains, whatever they called it up there in the Northwest, had gotten hit by artillery fire, and their team house had been semi-destroyed. And somehow or other, through finagling, they got authority for us to go up there with a couple of Chinook loads of material and help them rebuild their team house. And I think I was either a first lieutenant or captain when this happened. And we went up there, and I kind of got a feel for the SF guys, the first sergeant and the captain. And they had a big tower. It was the first night vision scope I ever saw in my life. We'd sit up there at night and look through that scope. And not only could you see vehicles moving back and forth, we were only 2,000 meters from the border, but you could see high lights going back and forth too. They had something flying along that border. Now, I'm not going to say what it was or whose helicopters it were, but there was something flying along that border. I went out on a mission one time with them, just a simple little one up to the border, and we got probably about 1,000 meters out there, and the captain looked at me and said, "Skip, you sit right there. We'll pick you up on the way back. If you keep going, you're going to get us all killed." So, apparently my stealthy step wasn't very good, so I sat there for about 2 hours, and they picked me up on the way back. About 7 o'clock every night, they would start lobbing rounds on us, and everybody knew it. I mean, a couple of NCOs had a 4-deuce mortar, and they'd go and start returning fire with that, and you could see the tube literally being moved along the border as they'd fire. So it wasn't real accurate, but the Mike forces and the local forces took some abuse. But I spent about 3.5, almost 4 weeks in and out of that place, and that was extremely interesting to see how the special forces operated with their Mike forces and with the local indigenous forces. My first LORPs I ever had, first place I've ever been that they taught you a drink for a hangover was kind of like a Sprite with a beer, mix them together. I don't advise it. I went to Australia in May of '69 on R&R. Needless to say, like everybody else, I fell in love with Tricia, and we corresponded for a good 6 months or so. But while there, I found out that the R&R liaison officer was going to be replaced. His rotation was due. So I went back and talked to MacV about, actually talked to my personnel people about extending and getting the R&R slot at Sydney. No problem, all done, paperwork done and everything. And Christmas Eve, I'm at Tonsanut with the anticipation of getting on a commercial airliner to fly to Sydney. And the Sergeant Major MacV personnel there said, "Sorry, sir, orders have been changed. I'm authorized to offer you Hong Kong or Thailand." And I said, "What happened to Sydney?" He said, "Well, Major so-and-so has been assigned to Sydney." I said, "Oh, okay. But which one would you like, Hong Kong or Thailand?" I said, "Sorry, Major." I said, "I signed up for Sydney." I said, "So I would suggest sometime in the next 24 hours that I'm either going to Sydney or I'm going to Travis Air Force Base. I don't know which, and that's kind of up to you." And he got a little uptight with me, obviously, and the colonel sitting behind him looked around and called me. He said, "Sergeant Major, you've been in the Army long enough to know when the captains get you by your privates, send them to Travis." And at 3 o'clock Christmas morning, I left Tonsanut for Travis, and at about 8 o'clock that night, I was in my mother's living room in Melrose, Massachusetts. And I fully expected, at that point I had orders to an engineer battalion at Fort Rucker for basically a 9-month termination tour. And Sandy called me over the holidays and said, "You report to Fort Walters, Texas, the 31st of January for primary helicopter flight training." And I thanked him, and he said, "I don't think I'm doing you a favor, so don't thank me just now." Now you got to go back and understand that I failed 29 flight physicals from 1964 to 1969. I had always wanted to go in the warrant officer program. I mean, it had nothing to do with Vietnam or here or anything. I wanted to fly. I've always wanted to fly. And this seemed to me like an idea how to fly. I probably did 10 or 12 flight physicals from the time I went into basic training till the time I got through OCS. To the point where I was threatened in OCS that they were going to throw me out of the program if I applied one more time. But they changed the rules in '69 on eyesight, which was the only thing that was holding me back. I was 20/50 and fully correctable. So I got in under the waiver. And they do a 2-week orientation program there where you start classroom and basic aeronautics and that kind of stuff before they actually let you touch an aircraft. And they do all the personnel stuff, including a flight physical. And I knew I'm a phony. They're going to catch up with me. And they're going to throw me out the gate with the broken saber and the epaulets torn off. And about 10 days into the program, somebody came by and called about 10 of us out of a class of maybe 45 outside the classroom. This is it. Bags packed, I'm going home. And they proceeded to hand me 2 pairs of clear glasses and 2 pairs of sunglasses and wished me well. I figured I'd made it. And George C. Scott was playing in Patton at the Post Movie Theater at the time. So anyway, I went through flight school with relatively successfully. My mother died in transition. You do from January until the middle of June at Fort Walters, Texas, outside of Fort Worth. And then you go to Fort Rucker in the middle of Alabama I was due to go through until the first week in October. My mother passed away, so I took 2 weeks emergency leave and went home for that. And then came back. So I graduated on the 20th of October, 1970 from flight school. And I was fortunate enough to be in at least the top 20% commandant's list. I mean, that's nothing to rave about, but it was better than being the last guy in the class, I guess. And through manipulations with my guy in Washington, I told him, you gotta understand, when you go through flight school as an officer during Vietnam, you lived off post, you got $25 a day per diem, plus your base pay, because you're technically still assigned to Saigon. You're only TDY in Texas. And then you go to Rucker and they pay you $11.25 a day. Well, I kind of got used to that. The warrant officer candidates, on the other hand, the true pilots of the Army, they did OCS from the day they got on to Fort Walters until the day they graduated from Rucker. And they didn't get paid a dime for the privilege. So, needless to say, some of my warrant officer brethren are not as happy with me as you might think. But I told Sandy, I said, I've gotten used to this. I like this. Send me to Chinook school. He said, I'm not sending you to Chinook school, but I can send you to Cobra school. So I said, all right. So I went to Savannah, Georgia, where the Cobra school was at Hunter Army Airfield for a month. During this period, I met my future wife. We kind of became engaged during that time frame. And on the 6th of January, 1971, I went back to Vietnam. Got into Long Binh. They sent us over to the 1st Aviation Brigade, a friend of mine that I'd gone through flight school with, named Carl Key. And I went back to Vietnam together. And were kind of paired as we ferreted our way through the command structure. Carl had spent 3.5 years in Germany while I was in Vietnam, and then come back for flight school.
What's the date by now?
This is the first week of January 1971.
Okay.
And brigade said, you know, your experience and knowledge and your Vietnam experience, we could really use you in the 3 shop. Yes, sir, we'd do anything you want to do, but, you know, we're brand new aviators. We really were hoping we could get down to a little flying. Oh, all right. And they sent us down to 12th Group. Well, the same thing went on at 12th Group, and they sent us down to the 11th Combat Battalion in Phu Loy, and the same thing happened, and we find ourselves at the 187th Assault Helicopter Company in Tay Ninh, Vietnam, called the Crusaders. The gun platoon was the Rat Pack. The commander was Major Carruthers. And John Carruthers looked at me, and Carl was with me when we interviewed with him coming through the order room. And he said, Davis, you outranked my platoon leader. You got 2 weeks. You take over command of the platoon. Go introduce yourself and I'll catch up with you later. And that was pretty much my in-country briefing from the commander. Well, we walked over, and I knock on the door, and Jimmy Siddons, captain, answers the door, and I said, "Captain Siddons, we're your two new Cobra pilots." And he welcomed us in, and he had a couple of the other officers standing around with captains, Balfour and Yeager, a couple of the other guys. And he started very nicely. "This is what we're going to do. We're going to work you in slowly. We're going to do some front seat time. We'll get some ordnance underneath you, and then we'll start flying you on the simpler missions." And I don't know if there was something in my expression or what, but he stopped in mid-sentence and looked at me and said, "What's your data rank?" And I told him. He never missed a beat. He looked at me and said, "I'll be the best assistant platoon leader you ever had." And about that time, he caught Key's eye. And he looked at Carl, and there were no words expressed. Carl just went. And Jimmy looked back at me and says, "I'll be the best section leader you've ever had." I mean, he went from being the platoon commander to being a section leader in a period of about 30 seconds. Unfortunately, 2.5 weeks later, I had to identify Jimmy's body. Coming back off a mission, they took some fire, took out the tail rotor. Lieutenant Rodney Woods was the back seat, Jim was the front seat. Woods did the most beautiful job of landing a Cobra without a tail blade on it, and hit the edge of a dike, and it rolled up a little bit on its nose, and the blade still impacted on the ground. And Rodney says, "Jim, get out, crawl left rear, crawl left." Do you understand? Jim waved his hand. And the door in the front seat of the Cobra's on the left side. So he gets out, stands up, and walks front. And he took the blade right across his chest, cut it literally into 4 pieces. Well, CNC's coming in behind him to check and make sure everybody's all right and to extract the pilots. Crew chief sees Jimmy go down, skids hit the ground. Crew chief runs across to Jimmy, catches the tip of that barn door blade on the Cobra in the back of his head and drops dead right there. So we lost 2 people, not as a result of combat action. So one of the first duties I had to do was identify Jim, and I don't think a day goes by that I don't think of Jimmy. Got the mission. For some reason, somebody came up with a great idea. Either the 7th Air Force didn't have enough to do, or Nixon was still antsy about Cambodia. But the idea came up, pair up some Army Cobras with Air Force FACs and a Huey back seat with a Cambodian and a Vietnamese and a MACV guy. And we would go shoot targets of opportunity along the Mekong River in Cambodia. We'd refuel on Navy barges just into Vietnam. They had our ordnance. And we flew a number of missions, probably about a month and a half. And on one day, we actually flew enough and hit enough that we got an invitation from the FAC pilots across the runway at Tay Ninh East from us to come to dinner in our honor. It seems that our Cobra team had a higher BDA than the entire 7th Air Force had that day. We hit a couple of ordnance piles, and they apparently had gotten weathered in. I don't know what, but we did pretty good. And then came St. Patrick's Day 17th, 1971. We went over to Loch Ninh and jumped into a rubber plantation, literally about 5 miles in diameter circle of rubber with one hole in the middle. And the Vietnamese are going to go in and do a combat search and destroy in the rubber. And we've got Vietnamese Hueys, we've got our Hueys, we've got the entire 11th Battalion's Hueys, we've got our Cobras, we've got their Charlie models, we've got Loaches, we've got some of the 1st and the 9th Cav. And I don't know, it doesn't seem to me that it takes a rocket scientist to understand when you got something that big and there's one hole in the middle that they probably can figure out that's where you're coming to. And they suckered us in. They let us put about, I'm going to say about 16 ships in, 2 flights of 8. And when they pulled out, they opened up on the Vietnamese, and it was just a bloodbath. And the commanders insisted to put more troops in. We did, I think, 2 more lifts in there before finally, guys, stop. We can't. We had 1 or 2 Cobras in the LZ, and we got the other crews out, thank God. there were probably half a dozen VNAF Hueys in the ground. We lost the only American helicopter pilot that I knew by aircraft, POW. They shot a loach down and the crew chief got killed, but they got the warrant officer and he was released in 1973 at Loch Ninh during the prisoner release. It was a disaster. And we went back to Tay Ninh, and the next day the battalion commander and the commander were touring the battle damage. We were trying to patch up Cobras, and particularly Hueys. And the battalion commander said, "Well, what did you think of the mission yesterday?" I said, it was a mission, sir. He said, "No, Captain, when I ask you a question, I expect to get an answer." I said, "Well, it was the most blankety blanked up mission that I've ever seen in my life, and the idiot that ran it should be shot." I got Lechner's perpetual hatred from that, but I also became the gun officer for the 11th Combat Assault Battalion for the next 3 months. For any mission that was multi-unit, I was the one that had to go to Fuloy and plan and coordinate the gun support for the mission. In May of '71,
Would I be assuming right that the guy who asked the question was the idiot who was in charge?
yes.
That's what I
Well, he was lieutenant colonel. There was a colonel in charge, but he wasn't there, so he didn't get a shot at me.
Yeah.
The lieutenant colonel did.
Gotcha.
Interestingly enough, 30 years later, he called me. He was putting together a history of the 11th CAB and wanted to interview me on it. In May of '71, you know, they'd instituted the 10-day leave program from Vietnam. You could take personal leave and at your own expense fly back to the States if you wanted to or go wherever you wanted to. So I flew back on Pan Am, $400 round trip, Thompson Nook to LA, and then you flew on from wherever you wanted to go from Los Angeles from there. Met my future bride in Long Island and spent a week with my family. Came back and turned over the gun platoon to Carl Key so he could get some command, and I took over a lift platoon. The 2nd Lift Platoon, the Mums, was kind of the sad sack platoon of the company. Never got off on missions on time, didn't show up where they were supposed to be, all sorts of problems. Well, I got over there and in about 36 hours found out exactly what the problem was, and it had been my predecessor. And after one platoon meeting, the guys were fantastic. It was one of the greatest experiences I ever had. We really developed a very good reputation. I have some of the crew chiefs are still personal friends now. Some of the pilots and I see each other frequently at the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association, Vietnam Crew Members Associations. It was a simple matter of leadership, and once they got some leadership and a couple of standards, they excelled exceptionally well. In September of '71, we were moved to Xi'an as a security measure. We'd been satchel charged and lost 2 aircraft, and command panicked and wanted to pull us closer back to the headquarters, so they pulled us back to Xi'an outside of Saigon. And within 3 weeks, we had 7 aircraft blown up in the revetments. But during that period of time, the XO honored a promise he'd made me, and I was appointed the operations officer of the 187th. So from September until December, I was fortunate enough to be the 3 for the 187th Assault Helicopter Company. And in go back to September, we did a mission up by Song Bay. And just as we were moving to Xi'an, we got a guy named John Quintero in the unit. He was a captain. He'd been a 9th Infantry soldier, badly wounded in the Delta, had gone home, recovered, went to infantry officer OCS, went to Europe, and became the first commissioned officer out of the Micronesian Islands. And had just gotten married, came to me. John was a big bear of a man. Oh, probably 75, 90% Polynesian. Great big belly laugh, greatest personality you ever want to see. And I took to John right away. And we flew a mission to Song Bay, and we got weathered in. And I was flying CNC, and we had 8-ship lift. We were supposed to do a Vietnamese a couple of combat insertions. And finally, the advisor said, okay, we're not going to be able to do this, you're released. And I talked to the platoon leader, who I would love to name, but I won't, and said, look, I'm a single ship, I'm going to go out. We all know that if we make a left turn, we'll miss the mountain, and eventually, worst come to worst, 45 minutes we'll hit the coast, and we know it'll be clear out on the coast, because this was low-hanging clouds. So I said, let me go out, and I'll keep in touch with their radio, and I'll give you a heads up. And I went out, made the left, and after about 3 minutes, pop, you're out in the sunshine. So I called back, and I said, Bob, send your ships out one at a time, 30-second intervals, turn due west, about 3 minutes you'll be out. He elected to take it off as a flight of 8 and headed due south, right into what we had. And it got worse, and it got worse. And, you know, our guys weren't instrument qualified. They had no business flying instruments alone, let alone in an 8-ship flight. And sooner or later, John's flight just went like this. And about 8 o'clock the next morning, we got the last body out. And General Pulaski was one kid that I identified. John Campus, he looked like everybody thinks of Poncheville, looks like Campus looked like it. He was the happiest, nicest guy you'd ever want to know. And John Quintero. So there's my 6 on the wall, none combat action. Sometime right around Thanksgiving in November, we had a simple combat assault north of Tay Ninh in Tin Yon. And we had 8 ships, and we picked up our Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese had a habit, unfortunately, I don't know, friends or security or whatever. You're supposed to put X number of people on an aircraft, and it would always be X plus. So when you take off, somebody in the flight would be saying, hey, I got 12, hey, I got 10. So you do the simple math and you realize, I'm not going to need 7 and 8. When we come out of the LZ, 7 and 8 break off, go back to Tay Ninh for fuel, we'll pick you up in the refuel depot. I'll use the last 6 to bring them in. So I got my 6 ships on final going back into the LZ, and the back seat keeps telling my advisor, airplane crash, airplane crash. And I'm sitting looking out the window, and here about 2 miles away, I can count 6 aircraft going into the LZ. I said, nothing's crashed, they're all there. No, aircraft crash. And I don't know why, but I banked around to the right, and there was the black smoke going up from 2 spots. And they'd gone back in formation, and a kid named Puff, Thomas Puff, been in country about 300 hours. And Tom was showing his new right seat how we used to fly formation in the 187th. And he came right up on them in intermeshed rotor blades. Well, one system totally departed the aircraft just below the main hub, and it went this way, and the airplane went this way. The other one lost, I don't know how much of their blades, but somehow or other, they were able to hold on to the aircraft to about 100 feet off the ground and pull all the collective pitch they had, and all 4 survived with fractures of the spine. The other 4 guys, the aircraft itself, nothing on the aircraft was any higher than that off the ground. I mean, after the fire and the melting and everything, it was just aluminum and helmets and, you know, web gear and that kind of stuff. So I tossed my hat in the ring and told the commander Mavardi, I said, that's it. I said, I will go back and I will fly helicopters, but I will not be the operations officer. I've only got 2.5 weeks left. I will not be CNC or piloting. I'll go out and fly a single ship for you all day long. And unfortunately, he put the guy that drove the kid into the bad weather, made him the S3 or the operations officer. But my last mission was kind of satisfying. East of Saigon is a place called Swan Lock, and it was the 18th ARVN's headquarters. Well, the general in the 18th ARVN liked to have a Huey, so they assigned me the mission of being in the Huey. And I'm out flying, I think I had Carl Key with me actually, and I'm out flying this mission, and we're on our way home. All I got to do is drop this general office at Plantation and head to Zion. Well, the general had some cement bags he wanted to take home for his villa. So we loaded them on, and I don't know why, after a year in Vietnam, I didn't pay attention. As I'm coming into POL, the Plantation, airplane's still doing about 30, 40 knots, but I've got no aft cyclic. There is none left. The cement blocks are throwing the CG off enough, or the cement bags off enough, that I can't get the rotor blades far enough back to slow the airplane down. Well, the POL dump is on a little bit of an incline, not much, but a little bit. And after about 5 minutes of trying to figure out how I'm going to survive this crash, the guy I was with, and I think it was Katie, said, why don't we just try to grease it on with the incline of the POL point and just lower the power as the skids hit the ground. And indeed it worked. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it worked. We got rid of the cement block, the cement bags and the general, and neither one of us said anything about it. But on the way back, it seems that during the night, our guns had been called out to support a Chinook going in to support some Arvins across the border. And Bob Green had the CNC. And the Chinook went down. But they survived the crash, so Bob went down to try to pick them up. And it turned out that the Arvins had gathered them up and brought them within their compound, and the decision was made to leave them there for the night. So Bob starts to pull back out to come home, and he takes horrendous fire. And the only time I ever heard of before the crash, the Huey caught on fire. So Bob has to land this airplane. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning, and the fire is coming forward so fast that the crew chief and gunner are sitting on the instrument console between the pilot and the co-pilot to get away from the flames. They get it on the ground, they all get out, and there's literally an exchange of fire. Now, there's argument as to how far away each were when they were shooting, but they E&E'd. And after 12 hours of searching and hunting and pin fillets and everything else, they found all 4 of them and got them out. So my last social event in the unit was celebrating the beer mess in the officers' club with the crew members and the pilots on that flight that came out. And Bob literally had singed hair on the back of his head. That's how close the fire got to him.
Wow.
So it ended on a good note, but I left 10 bodies there that were answerable to me, that were not a result of combat action. I never lost a soldier in Vietnam to direct combat action. And anybody that tells you that they don't think about them every day of their lives is either lying to you or something's wrong with them, because they're with me every day. I came back, and the Army honored my request to go to Fort Devens because I had some family affairs to settle. I got married, did a year at Fort Devens, and despite a very magnanimous offer from the United States Army, I got out. I sold helicopters for a while in New Jersey and New York for the only civilian contractor for Bell Helicopter. And in '75, I went to work for Merrill Lynch International, as did my wife from Merrill Lynch in Trenton. We had 2 children. My wife finally impressed upon me to move south to Georgia, her home area, and I've lived here since 1979. I got in the reserves in New Jersey and spent the better part of 7 years on the staff of the 78th Division Training in Edison, New Jersey. They had a small aviation section, and I was the special staff officer for air and got to fly. And then came down to Georgia, and it took me about 2.5 years to get in the Georgia National Guard. And at that point, it was either take a non-flying job and get promoted to major or revert to warrant. And for some reason, brilliance struck me, and I took the revert to W-2. And I served in the Guard while still being in the brokerage business until Desert Storm. And then through a little manipulation, I managed to get mobilized for Desert Storm. And while they finished it so fast, we never deployed. I was at Hunter Army Airfield for 15 months. And in December of '91, I came back to Atlanta and realized at age 47 I didn't want to be a stockbroker anymore. And the Guard offered me a civilian training officer position. So I took it. And I stayed with the Guard through 2005, when I was given an early retirement, and went back on active duty as a Chief Warrant Officer 4, mobilization augmentee. And a month later, failed the flight physical, had open heart surgery, and was in the process of being discharged, which took about a year. I retired at age 61 from the Georgia Army National Guard as a CW4 with about, I had just under 16 years service for retirement, but I was 5 months short of 40 years total service time. And then retired from the Georgia Guard itself as a civilian employee in 2008. And since then, I've done some contract work for the Georgia National Guard, both in recruiting and in training. And I'm still currently contracted to the Georgia Army National Guard Recruiting Office. I don't know from Vietnam. I don't like to get into the, we were winning when I left, I don't know what happened type of argument. Whether we should have been there, I think there's very little question we should have been there. Probably didn't have any choice in being there. And anybody who wasn't there in the 60s in the whole Soviet Union, U.S., East, West, Fall the Gap, Europe, probably can't make an intelligent decision as to whether we should have been there or not. Now, the fact that our execution lacked a great deal, there's very little argument. The fact that it became a fiasco of contractors and money and corporations, there's no argument. The fact that Johnson was never going to allow us to win the war, even if it was winnable, which militarily it certainly was, but it was like the Iraqi had said in the past, sooner or later you're going home, I'm still going to be here. So from that standpoint, I don't know. The Vietnamese are probably much better off now. Is that because we were there? I don't know. I wouldn't profess. I would love to go back. I love the Vietnamese. I think the Vietnamese are great people. They're industrious. They care about their families. They care about their country. But until I can be sure that my money, my dollar, will not go to the reinforcement of that government, I won't go back. But I'm hoping before I die that opportunity presents itself. I can say without question that I am who I am because of Vietnam and my experiences in Vietnam. And while there's a lot of things that I might do differently, there's certainly a lot of things I would like to have seen done differently in Vietnam. I will never, ever regret going and participating and being part of it. And it's like the guy from the 101st said, Granddaddy, were you a hero during the war? No, but I certainly served with some of the finest people I've ever known. And I think the thing that strikes me the most and that I'll remember forever is a lot of the people you got so close to, and a lot of the people that you're still close to today, if you'd met them 40 years ago on the sidewalk, you wouldn't have invited them into your house for a drink. You wouldn't have wanted them to come to dinner. And yet you gave them your life, literally, and they took you back. And no matter what happened, they always came. I never had a soldier in Vietnam fail to do what they were asked to do, what they knew they had to do. Doesn't mean they were happy about it. Doesn't mean they thought it was a great idea, but they always did it. I don't remember ever having a soldier that didn't do their job, and obviously that was during the days of draftees, if you will. Some of my best soldiers had U.S. before their serial numbers. So, but to be given that opportunity at the age of 21, 23, 25, and that responsibility, it's never been matched since. That was, outside of the birth of my children and grandchildren and my marriage, it's got to be the high point of my life. There's no question about it. And yeah, I'd do it again even knowing the results. I might try to do some things differently, but yeah, I'd do it again, even though in the end result.
I can't think of a much better wrap-up to it. Did you have any other final words, or are we done?
I think that pretty much does it. The interesting footnote, and I don't know if the numbers are accurate, but I've been told that there was something less than 3 million people directly involved in the Vietnam War itself. And yet, in a recent census, something in excess of 13 million are claiming to have been veterans.
10 times.
I think that pretty much says about all there needs to be said. Yep. Thank you very much for what you guys are doing.
Okay, thank you,
Well,
sir.
thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Now I'm going to the bladder.
Okay, good. That was really good.
Where's the bathroom?
I'll take you.
Okay.
Man, he was ready. I mean, he came in saying no paperwork, and oh crap.
Yeah, I mean, that
I thought this
it
place
just-
died on us.
this one flickered, and I couldn't tell whether it was on or off, but it was on when I just looked.
Yeah.
So, I mean, well, we'll see what Phil thinks of that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna get a bio for
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask him to take this home with him in bio form, because I think it's probably too important a document to just scribble off.
Yeah.
Tell him to take his time, fill it out, get the stuff right, the release form, now we can get him to do here. That was, you're right, I mean, he just started talking and
I know.
rolled
I mean,
right on
this
through
is
it.
one of the deals you just kind of open the can and step
Yeah.
away it went.
And it was good, I mean, it was.
I was afraid you might have. I would have had some trouble
I-
with keeping up, and a
just
couple
caught
of
as much as
spellings. Zeon, I don't know
Yeah,
how
I
the hell
don't
you
know.
spell Zeon.
I mean, there's a lot of phonetic
Yeah.
spelling in there. We have to find that book that was up there with the Vietnam locations in it. I imagine that might have gotten taken down to the archives. But, we had that book, Where We Were,
Yeah.
and
right
I'll
here.
have to ask somebody where it is.
Yeah.
Gosh, I didn't even get his full name.
Oh, yeah, I'd scribbled it down. The middle name was Robinson. Where the hell did I write it? Yeah, Sumner Robinson Davis.
Sumner, okay. Well, I'm gonna get him to write it on here. Because we gotta at least get his right name on the envelope. Okay. He's trying to get in,
Was that all right?
Ben, it was great. It was great. You finished up right at about 55 minutes.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it was good. You just took off. I mean, that's exactly what this is about. It's just letting you go. I mean, it's your time, and you say what you want. And,
Well, obviously, you can tell it's not something that I have just impromptu put
Yeah.
together.
No,
I've
you've
thought about it
obviously
for a
been
long
thinking about it,
time.
yeah.
But that's good. I mean,
Yeah.
you know in your mind where you want this to go. Well, let me ask you to do one thing.
Whatever you would like me to do.
Okay, we use this is softer. I mean, this for sure you can do here.
Yep.
Just print your name and sign it down there. That's the release.
Okay. One of the things I've found as I've gotten older is what do you call it? The smoothness of my hand has gone away.
I no longer write, I print.
Yeah, same
Because
here,
it's
same
so
here.
bad.
It really is. Of course, I developed a stockbroker signature block. What is today? The 2nd,
14th.
Valentine's
14th?
Day.
Yeah, I did the
14.
roses, so I'm okay.
I did candy in the card, so
Good man.
I got 12 months.
God, you know, we talk about it. One of the things that we ought to do is we ought to figure out some way to get our wives and girlfriends and spouses that went through this crap with us to come in and
Yeah.
do their side of it.
Well, you know, some people have brought their wives. And-
Really?
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, they don't really take a major role, but they're there and they make comments and things like that. I would ask you to take that with you and do it, because
I'd be glad to.
it's really important, and I'd rather you take the
Well,
time and do it.
particularly the ribbons and
Yeah.
stuff that you asked for, I'd have to go back and, I mean,
that's
I've got a
fine.
couple of Bronze Stars and an ARCOM and an MSN.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
don't
if you
know
want to
rest
take
of
the
it.
picture and do it that way, that's fine. But what this is used for, if you go on the Library of Congress website,
Mm-hmm.
and I tell people, just pick John McCain, and it'll show you what the summary is that will be available for the public to see on that website.
Well, that'd be super.
And that's basically the information that goes in there.
So at some point in time, my granddaughter can.
Well, you'll have a
Yeah,
copy of the
yeah.
video, and at some point, if we ever get these transcribed, which is not in the foreseeable future, you'll probably get a hard copy of it too.
And are these DVDs reproducible? I mean,
Yeah.
can I take them to like a CVS or something and have?
You can have Phil, for some reason, Phil Winslow's name has been replaced by Phil Wilson. He's a guy I used to work with. Phil will make copies for you. He just needs to know how many you want. Now, he's still a little behind.
I was thinking about something like Christmas
Oh.
gifts to my granddaughters for,
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
that'd be
future.
fabulous.
Or maybe for my kids and my grandkids.
Well, you'll have it before Christmas, I can guarantee
Oh,
you
that'd
that.
be excellent.
But
That'd be
he,
super.
once you get the original, and
Mm-hmm.
it may be a month, maybe 6 weeks or so, because like I said, he's still, Phil takes this very seriously.
You know, is there something like a Photoshop where I can go in and clean it up myself if there's sections I don't want them to see?
There's nothing in there that you should,
No.
I mean, that
No.
was a
Yeah, yeah.
good presentation.
It was,
I mean,
I know you guys want to get on, but it does, well, you've probably done it yourselves.
Yeah,
It obviously, you've written, there's some emotion involved in
Oh,
it,
yeah.
obviously. Nothing can move you that much throughout your whole life and not have it be
I
emotional.
thought your comments about the people was really poignant. I mean, when I left Vietnam, I came back in '69, and my commission, I was a reserve officer, was ending. I mean, I think I was supposed to get out in '70, in the summer of '70. And once I got back and got settled in, and just being around the people, I mean, everywhere you went at that period, you were with people who had been there, you know, and that's really what made me decide to stay in the Marine Corps. It was the people. It was.
My decompression was Fort Devens, and the most loving and understanding woman God ever put on the face of the earth, because the first 6 months of our marriage had to be utter hell for her.
Yeah.
Between my drinking
Yeah.
and temper isn't the right word, because I've never been a physically violent type of person. You get this size, you almost can't, because you'll always be blamed no matter what happens. But I did drink far, far too much, and I did argue too emphatically on a regular basis, and it had to be pretty miserable for her for the first 6 months or so. And,
Well, I mean,
I have no
just
patience
stress.
for guys our generation that are suddenly going to VA and saying, "Oh my God, I'm overwhelmed with PTSD." You know, bullshit. But I think virtually every one of us came back with some form of it,
Yeah.
and because it wasn't recognized at the time, we dealt with it in different
Yeah.
ways. Drank our way through it, had wives that helped us through it, brothers, whatever. And the kids today certainly do, and they need all the help we can possibly give them.
I agree. I mean, I volunteer at the VA hospital on Wednesdays. I don't do anything.
How do you
inside.
park over there?
Well, you get there early, for one thing. I usually get there, I'm supposed to start my volunteer time at 8, so I get there about 10 till and park in the back on the decks. Usually there are spaces on the very top.
I missed 2 appointments because I drove around for an hour and couldn't get in there, so I moved everything down to the Macon Clinic, and I go to Carl Vinson now, and it's like night and day.
If you have to go there,
And I never complained about the hospital. The hospital treated me beautifully.
but it sucks.
Getting
in
into the
there.
damn place.
They have a program now with the Briarcliff Baptist Church. It's right off Claremont Road.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I used to do.
Well, I'll tell you, I've gone to Carl Vinson one time, and I'm not going back to Claremont. Ain't gonna happen.
Well, you know, wherever you're
I mean, I
comfortable.
got acres and acres and acres of parking, and when I walk in, I mean, how do they keep that place open? I don't know. Because I walk in and it's, oh, you're 10 minutes early. That means I get to go home today. You know?
Well, you know,
That's amazing.
where I do my volunteer work is right at the information desk there where you come in from.
Yep.
And the people just come in and they're just,
Oh,
you know,
oh.
because they're stressed for having waited in line.
I'm
and
still supposed to be having a pulmonary appointment up there, and I told him, I said, listen, I'll reschedule somewhere else because there's no way that I'm gonna come and put myself through this again.
Yeah.
It's not gonna happen.
Well, people say when the decks are finished, but I mean, my understanding is after they finish the construction now, they're gonna build another deck, so I mean.
Look at all the people we're adding every single day.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've pretty much had my shot at it. It's probably time for these kids coming back to get their shot.
Well, were you comfortable with the way everything went?
Absolutely.
Good.
You guys
That's
are very
good.
professional, very at ease, and of course, knowing you helps too.
Yeah. Well, we try to,
I mean, you walk in, you realize, okay, Roger's an asshole, so you just understand that, don't worry about it.
once you get over that, it's okay, right? Hey, it was
Tony,
really
thank
good,
you.
Skip,
Good
thank
job.
you.
Thank you very much, Roger. Appreciate you being
Don't
here.
forget your phone.
No, I'll come back for it. I did get this, though. What was the thing, what's this?
Oh,
Oh, wonderful. What was the thing in downtown Atlanta that's kind of like a museum near the Varsity on Spring Street? It's the Atlanta something. Is it an extension of this place?
Oh, the Margaret Mitchell House?
No. This is,
I don't know.
we had a couple of Army Aviation Heritage Foundation dinners down there. It's down between Peachtree and Spring, or Peachtree and that other one that the Varsity's on, down in the St. Luke's, not St. Luke's. It's the one that does the soup kitchen and the,
Yeah, I don't know.
Shelter.
I don't know what it is.
I'm trying to think, and I always thought that was the Atlanta History Center, but obviously it's not.
I'm glad you came.
What's this across the road? The big complex? Is that one of the?
That's a
big-
country club.
Yeah, is it one of the big country clubs?
Yeah, I don't know what the name of it is. I haven't been invited. so
Capital
I-
City Club and the Cherokee Club and, oh, yeah, no, not my territory. You guys be good.
Thanks.
Thank you again.
Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
participation.
And I'll see you, if not before, I'll see you next month.
Okay.